Well, let's stop it at 3. What do you say? I think 3 men will do as well and prove as much as a regiment. New York Mail and Express. A few days before the new year, the scientific world was shaken by the remarkable discovery by Wilhelm Röntgen of a queer, unknown energy that he called X-rays, which emanated from his Leonard and Crookes tubes. Mikhail Pupin wrote, "No other discovery within my lifetime has ever aroused the interest of the world as did the discovery of the X-rays." Every physicist dropped his own problems and rushed headlong into the research. Astonishingly, Pupin added, "To the best of my knowledge, I was at that time the only physicist here who had had any laboratory experience with vacuum tube research. I obtained the first X-ray photograph in America on January the 2nd, 1896, 2 weeks after the discovery was announced in Germany." As Pupin could so neatly do, he forswore any mention of his compatriot. To Pupin, Tesla was a non-person. Röntgen gained world recognition virtually overnight with his announcement that he had discovered a new energy emanating from cathode ray tubes that could illuminate light-sensitive chemicals at the far end of a room, penetrate solid objects, and photograph the internal organs and bones of living beings. As Pupin noted, scientists from all over the world dropped their current projects to join in this exciting new venture. Tesla himself wrote no fewer than 9 articles on the topic in a 2-year period. Although Tesla may have noticed these rays and their effects on photographic paper years earlier, he did not pursue the investigations, and left no doubt that the discoverer of what he liked to call shadowgraphs was Wilhelm Röntgen. Tesla had taken the word shadowgraph from Søren Kierkegaard, who described them in his essay, Either or. To the existential philosopher, they were sketches that derive from the darker side of life, but are not directly visible. The shadowgraph does not become perceptible until I see through the external. Not until I look through it do I discover that inner picture too delicately drawn to be outwardly visible, woven as it is of the tenderest moods of the soul. In Europe, media X-rays were being produced by static machines and Ruhmkorff induction coils. Tesla suggested instead the use of a high-frequency disruptive coil attached to a special bulb with 2 electrodes, a cathode inside the vacuum for generating the cathode streams, and an anode placed as far away as possible outside the bulb to limit the reduction of the potential. With this apparatus, effective pressures of about 4 million volts were achieved. At first the bulb will get hot and glow with a purplish hue, then the electrode will disintegrate and the bulb will cool. The use of a fan helps. From this point on, the bulb is in very good condition for producing the Röntgen shadows. When the electrode is too hot, it is probably because the vacuum is not high enough. Generating such high voltages, this work not only was set up to measure the quality of the energy emanating from the bulb and to test its ability to pierce living and non-living objects or be reflected, it also laid the foundation for Tesla's later experiments with particle beam weapons. Here, in 1896, Tesla discussed the idea promulgated by the quantum physicists a few years later that the energy had both particle-like and wave-like properties. Having set up a target to shoot the streams at, Tesla wrote, "The effects on the sensitive plate are due to projected particles, or else to vibrations of extremely high frequencies." The inventor further speculated that the streams are formed of matter in some primary or elementary condition. Similar streams must be emitted by the sun and probably by other sources of radiant energy. Tesla also appeared to have come close to the idea of breaking up the electron into subatomic particles. The projected lumps of matter act as inelastic bodies, similarly to ever so many small lead bullets. These lumps are shattered into fragments so small as to make them lose entirely some physical properties possessed before the impact. Might it not be possible that in the Röntgen phenomena we may witness a transformation of ordinary matter into ether? Or we may be confronted with a dissolution of matter into some unknown primary form, the Akasha of the old Vedas. The inventor, as physicist, then proceeded to take X-rays of small animals such as birds and rabbits, as well as his workers and of his own skull, ribs, limbs, and vertebrae. As some shadowgraphs took as long as an hour to obtain, Tesla noticed that he would sometimes fall asleep while he was being bombarded by the machine. Week after week, Tesla would crank out yet another article on his latest results. On March the 18th, 1896, he announced in Electrical Review that he had produced shadowgraphs of humans at distances of 40 feet and affected photosensitive paper at a distance of 60 feet from the source of the rays. The inventor also tested different metals to see which ones reflected the energy in the best way. Adorned with a lavish X-ray of the bones of the wizard's own ribcage, the article conveyed an eerie impression. "I told some friends," Tesla wrote, "that it might be possible to observe by the aid of a screen objects and skeletons passing through a street. I mention this odd idea only as an illustration of how these scientific developments may even affect our morals and customs. Perhaps we shall shortly get used to this state of things." For Tesla, Röntgen rays were a gateway to a world invisible and ripe for new possibilities. Röntgen gave us a wonderful gun to fire, projecting missiles of 1,000-fold greater penetrative power than that of a cannonball, and carrying them probably to distances of many miles. These missiles are so small that we may fire them through our tissues for days, weeks, and years, apparently without hurtful consequence. Throughout the year, the inventor suffered from the grippe. Although his illness made the papers, nobody seemed to link it to his excessive experimentation with the mysterious energy. In fact, concerning the risk to one's health, Tesla wrote, "No experimenter need be deterred from investigation of Röntgen rays for fear of poisonous or generally deleterious action, for it seems reasonable to conclude that it would take centuries to accumulate enough of such matter to interfere seriously with the process of life of a person." We now know, of course, that this view is wrong, as long-term exposure to X-rays can be very dangerous to one's health. Tesla did, however, refer to pain in the center of his forehead when experimenting with the rays, and to the hurtful action on the skin, inflammation and blistering. But this he attributed to the production of ozone, which in small quantities was a most beneficial disinfectant. Nevertheless, there was a severe accident in the lab to a clear and zealous assistant without a protective screen present. The worker suffered severe blistering and raw flesh exposed. The inventor undertaking the bitter duty of recording the accident in order to lessen the danger for others. Edison was also making headlines with his work with Röntgen rays, especially when he noted that the streams caused blind people to experience sensations in their eyes. The X-rays succeeded in eliciting from the blind the ejaculation, "I see, yes, I see a light." Edison, whose fluoroscope was already being used for lighting the eye during eye surgery, saw the possibility that eyesight, in some way, might be restored with the use of X-rays. Tesla doubted it, and so the press took up the charge and created a new round of headlines, placing the two pioneers once again against each other. The humorless dark Hungarian had the unpleasant duty to say, "Is it not cruel to raise such hopes when there is so little ground for it? What possible good can result?" Time proved Edison wrong, as X-rays have not been used to stimulate the retina in such a way as to restore sight. But the two wizards did perform a number of successful miracles with the strange energy when each used the instruments to locate bullets lodged in the bones of various patients. Fortunately, the Kentucky School of Medicine helped bring the battle between the two to a close when they combined the devices of Tesla and Edison to extract birdshot from the wounded foot of a voter who had received the injury in a fight at an election poll. After developing the X-ray, which took only 90 seconds to make, every bone was distinctly shown, and the shot, about 30 in number, were plainly located. To celebrate the triumph and quell any purported hostilities, T.C. Martin was able to coax Tesla into joining Edison and a number of other electricians for a day of fishing on a topsail schooner off Sandy Hook. The event was sponsored by the Safety Insulated Wire and Cable Company. Although a storm erupted, accompanied by dark clouds and lightning, the bold fishermen were undismayed. in stately grandness, as happy and well satisfied a party as ever rode the waves of the Atlantic's billows. Toward nightfall the ship turned her prow homeward. Nikola Tesla caught a flounder of large dimensions, and Edison caught a shocking big fluke. 20. Fall Speech, 1897. Nikola Tesla said much in a notable speech at the banquet to celebrate the conveyance of power from Niagara to Buffalo. Not just a plodding workman, he is a dreamer of wise dreams, a poet and a humanitarian working with new tools for the benefit of all. He is a man who wonders at the folly of men who invent guns when they might invent tools. His spirit is naturally hopeful. He looks not so much at the world as at the universe. He finds power in the waterfall, and at the same time looks forward to a time when we may, perhaps, tap the unseen forces of the planets and use the cosmic energy that swings the stars in their courses. He looks to a time when power shall be so cheap, so universal, that all labor shall be done by tireless machines, and every man's life be thus so much more worth living. Charles Barnard. In July 1896, Tesla journeyed to Niagara Falls for his first survey of this great enterprise. He traveled with George Westinghouse, Edward Dean Adams, William Rankin, and Commander George Melville of the U.S. Navy. Also present was Thomas Ely, supervisor of motive power for the Pennsylvania Railroad. Tesla was important to all five for almost as many reasons. A reporter for the Niagara Gazette greeted them upon their arrival. "Tesla is an idealist," the journalist wrote, "fully 6 feet tall, very dark of complexion, nervous and wiry. Impressionable maidens would fall in love with him at first sight, but he has no time to think of impressionable maidens. In fact, he has given as his opinion that inventors should never marry. Day and night he is working away at some deep problems that fascinate him, and anyone that talks with him for only a few minutes will get the impression that science is his only mistress, and that he cares more for her than for money and fame." Rankin predicted that Buffalo would receive electrical power by November, and Westinghouse predicted the costs would be cheaper than steam. "You could say it will cost 1/2 what steam power costs," Rankin added in support. "Mr. Tesla, what is your opinion of the effect of this development of power on Buffalo and Niagara Falls?" "The effect will be that both cities will stretch out their arms until they meet." Tesla looked up at the roaring cataract, overcome with emotion, as he and the others donned their rain gear before entering the mighty wonder. He had grown up just 50 miles from the magnificent maze of cascading flumes known as Plevitsa Lakes, but those were Lilliputian compared to this thundering colossus. Pride overcame the inventor as he trailed behind for a few moments to think, as he so often did, of his mountain homeland. It had been 4 years since he had seen his family, 15 years since his first successful construction of a turbine that could be driven by water power, and nearly 35 years since he had told his uncle of his dream of one day harnessing Niagara Falls. Humbled by this awesome manifestation of nature, he sat for a moment to reflect as he watched his cohorts disappear along the catwalks into a mist of rainbows. "Let's go, Mr. Tesla," Adams called out, having waited as patiently as he could, for the next stop on the itinerary was the Edward Dean Adams hydroelectric power station, the first of 2 that would be built in his name. Designed by Stanford White, the edifice housed nearly a dozen gargantuan Tesla turbines, capable of generating collectively over 35,000 kilowatts. The men appeared like dwarfs, sauntering amid a lustrous gadgetry assembled as if by giants, one long row of towering kettle-shaped engines. From this chamber, an efficient, non-polluting, never-ending source of electrical energy was about to be generated, capable of driving the factories and illuminating the streets and homes of nearly 1/4 of the entire continent. The echoes of their steps faded as they stood for a moment in silence in the chapel of the dawning new age. Upon his return to New York, Tesla found a letter from Sir William Preece. A young man, half British on his mother's side and half Italian, had stopped by Preece's office with a wireless Morse code apparatus based on the work of Heinrich Hertz. Guglielmo Marconi, just 22 years old, had brought a notebook which reviewed the literature in the field, most likely the writings of Hertz, Lodge and Tesla. Marconi had chosen wisely, as Preece was head of the British Post Office and had experimented himself in testing induction effects through the ground from telegraph lines. After the experiments with the classical Hertz devices under the auspices of the Imperial Post Office in England, Tesla reported many years later, Preece wrote me a letter conveying the information that the tests had been abandoned as of no value, but he believed good results would be possible by my system. In reply, I offered to prepare 2 sets for trial and asked him to give me the technical particulars necessary to the design. Just then, Marconi came out with the emphatic assertion that he had tried out my apparatus and that it did not work. Evidently he succeeded in his purpose, for nothing was done in regard to my proposal. Tesla's first patent, specifically for wireless transmission, was filed a year later on September the 2nd, 1897, number 650,353. The following month, in August 1896, Tesla received a histrionic plea from Catherine, who was vacationing with her family at a cottage in Bar Harbor, Maine. Wanting desperately for Tesla to join them, she could only allude to her wish. August the 6th, 1896. Dear Mr. Tesla, I am so troubled about you. I hear you are ill. Leave work for a while. I am haunted by the fear that you may succumb to the heat. Find a cool climate. Do not stay in New York. That would mean the laboratory every day. You are making a mistake, my dear friend, almost a fatal one. You think you do not need change and rest. You are so tired you do not know what you need. If somebody would only pick you up and carry you bodily. I hardly know what to expect to gain by writing you. My words have no effect, forgotten as soon as read, perhaps. But I must speak, and I will. You do not send me a line? How delighted I should be if it bore an unfamiliar postmark. Sincerely yours, Catherine Johnson. Robert, having some perspective on Catherine's sense of drama, also wrote to invite him up. But I know it isn't safe for you to get more than 3 miles away from Delmonico's. The rumor is that you have melted in your laboratory. Perhaps Catherine was right, for Tesla was unavailable to the Johnsons even upon their return. Tesla was also ignoring letters from his sisters from Croatia, particularly Maritza, who, much like Catherine, asked him why he would not respond. Röntgen rays had been left behind many months ago, but he was still gaunt from illness and overwork. Now he was in a wireless race against newcomers like Marconi. Fearing that his invention would be pirated, Tesla's lab became a more mysterious place. November 7th, 1896. Dear Mr. Tesla, it may seem presumptuous for a stranger to address you, but Mrs. Johnson, my wife, whom you may remember having met, cannot refrain from uniting with me in congratulating you on the success of the buffalo experiment. If this seems taking too great a liberty with one whom we know so slightly, I trust you will attribute it to our interest in the progress of humanity. Respectfully yours, Robert Underwood Johnson. Tesla's holiday spirit prevailed, and he joined his beloved Johnsons for Christmas dinner, apologizing for being so distant by bringing Mrs. Philippoff an exquisite bouquet of flowers. The celebration of the inauguration of the Niagara Power Station was held at the Ellicott Club in Buffalo in the midst of winter's most dangerous month. Fortunately, the weather was permitting, and 350 of the nation's most prominent businessmen made the January trek. Hosted by Morgan's advance man, Francis Lynn Stetson, a law partner of Grover Cleveland's, the list of attendees included a veritable who's who of commerce. Curiously missing from the event, although invited, were such notables as John Jacob Astor, J. Pierpont Morgan, and Thomas Alva Edison. Mr. Stetson spoke of the pall of smoke hanging over Buffalo, and said that the day should come when power would come from Niagara and not from smoke and steam. The introduction of Nikola Tesla, the greatest electrician on earth, produced a monstrous ovation. The guests sprang to their feet and wildly waved napkins and cheered for the famous scientist. It was 3 or 4 minutes before quiet prevailed. A constellation of psychological peculiarities accompanied the wizard's lecture. He began in a self-deprecating manner. "I have scarcely had courage enough to address an audience on a few unavoidable occasions. Even now, as I speak, the fugitive conceptions will vanish, and I shall experience certain well-known sensations of abandonment, chill, and silence. I can see already your disappointed countenances, and can read in them the painful regret of the mistake of your choice. Why did Tesla poison the well with this dreadful opening? A deep sense of inferiority appears evident, and yet Tesla was also completely aware that this dinner was in his honor, and was therefore the pinnacle of his life to date, and through him an apotheosis for the whole of humanity. Why didn't he simply congratulate himself, or accept praise well-deserved? We see here the first tangible manifestations of an overpowering feeling of inferiority, a clear-cut, self-destructive element in his nature. The dark legacy of a deep-seated repression flooded through his veins like a hydra about to annihilate. Nevertheless, it was his inventions that would change an entire world. It was the name of Nikola Tesla which appeared a dozen times on the patent plaque of his new system. It was Nikola Tesla who was praised with wild enthusiasm by the corporate and engineering intelligentsia, and it was Nikola Tesla who changed in precise and measurable ways the very direction humanity was taking. This was a moment of anointment. Through his specific action, the evolution of the race and the texture of an entire planet would be permanently changed in a positive way. Yet at this moment of the fulfillment of his greatest wish, a deep neurotic constellation was also triggered. From the psychoanalytic perspective, Tesla could now repay his family for the death of his brother by symbolically bringing the brother back to life, and on the larger scale give the world a new life, his AC polyphase system. But the shadow had its hold, and he was simply unable to accept the happiness of the moment without throwing a monkey-wrench into it. His speech went on. "These remarks, gentlemen, are not made with the selfish desire of winning your kindness and indulgence of my shortcomings, but with the honest intention of offering you an apology for your disappointment. But I am hopeful that in my formless and incomplete statements there may be something of interest benefiting this unique occasion." Tesla's unconscious plan, the heart and soul of his neurosis, was to completely undermine himself by downgrading the Niagara endeavor. It is possible that Stetson had read the speech on the train ride up to Buffalo and foresaw the tragic consequences, as it appears that he waited for a propitious moment to cut the tail end off. Now that Tesla had arrived, he began to see himself as more than a mere inventor. He was a creator, not of great paintings or of great musical compositions, but of great technologies. Niagara Falls was but a stepping stone to the larger plan. His speech went on to pay homage to the philanthropic spirit of the businessman and the great contribution of the scientist. Tesla also hailed such individuals as arc lighting designer Charles Brush, vacuum tube inventor Philip Leonard, and railroad engine designer Frank Sprague, as well as Wilhelm Röntgen, Lord Rayleigh, Elihu Thomson, Thomas Edison, and George Westinghouse. All of these men, and many more, are untiringly at work investigating new regions and opening up unsuspected and promising fields. Among all these many departments of research, there is one which is of the greatest significance for the comfort and existence of mankind, and that is the electrical transmission of power. We have many a monument of past ages exemplifying the greatness of nations, the power of men, the love of art and religious devotion. But that monument at Niagara has something of its own worthy of our scientific age, a true monument of enlightenment and of peace. It signifies the subjugation of natural forces to the service of man, the discontinuance of barbarous methods, the relieving of millions from want and suffering. Power is our mainstay, the primary source of our many-sided energies. Stetson saw his moment and returned to the stage to whisper in Tesla's ear. "I am just informed," Tesla suddenly announced, "that in 3 minutes we have to leave." What can I say? Cries of no. I can congratulate the courageous pioneers who have embarked in this enterprise and carried it to success. Buffalonians, I would say friends, let me congratulate you on the wonderful expanse of possibilities opened, and let me wish that in no time distant your city will be a worthy neighbor of the great cataract which is one of the great wonders of nature. There was a train to catch. The rest of the speech would be published in the electrical journals. It was a fortuitous break, for here we see a positive statement concerning the stupendous achievement at Niagara, and we also see the seeds of a new vision Tesla was planting for the world. He was not a mechanic, but an artist. Monetary gain was not an end. In fact, the providing of cheap power for the masses was a goal. Businessmen were not greedy capitalists, but noble philanthropists. This was a utopian dream which perhaps one day might come true. And as we shall see, it was also a justification, maybe even a rationalization, for some of the audacious ways Tesla chose to spend the contributions of the financiers who came to support his Promethean campaign. Playing the master game, Tesla was gambling for all the stakes. His goal was no less than the ability to transform himself into a deity. This, as O'Neill writes, was his Superman complex. We shall not satisfy ourselves simply with improving present-day methods. We have a greater task to fulfill, to evolve means for obtaining energy from stores which are forever inexhaustible, to perfect methods which do not imply consumption and waste of any material whatever. I have examined for a long time the possibilities of operating engines on any point of the earth by the energy of the medium, and I am glad to say that I have devised means which has given me fresh hope that I shall see the fulfillment of one of my fondest dreams, namely, the transmission of power from station to station without the employment of any connecting wire. Tesla had audaciously proclaimed in the written and published part of his speech that this great enterprise which they were about to usher in, and the one we still use a century later, was already obsolete. He had a better plan. There was no need for the millions of telephone poles that were to be erected, no need for the megatons of copper that would have to go into an endless array of interconnected power lines, no need for the enormous production of rubber for insulation, or for the tens of thousands of acres required to support the system, and no need for the workmen who were soon to be hired to maintain the equipment. For all of this, the transmission of electrical power, light and information could be achieved without wires. No wonder Stetson cut Tesla short. This speech was the pivotal moment in Tesla's career. He set out full force to achieve this end. Nothing but death would stop him in his attempts to realize the dream. 21. Luminaries, 1896 to 98. A memorable occasion was the first meeting of Tesla and Paderewski, two more intellectual or lovable men I have never known. They were most congenial and became friends at once. On comparing notes, they discovered that they had both been in Strasbourg years before at the same time, 1882, Tesla as an electrical assistant on a small salary, and Paderewski as a student in music, and they laughed heartily at the change of their condition since that time of storm and stress. Robert Underwood Johnson. Tesla traveled back to Manhattan with T.C. Martin, Francis Lynn Stetson, Darius Ogden Mills, and John Hayes Hammond's brother, Richard Hammond, who was considering placing Tesla turbines at a dam in California. A Röntgen symposium was being coordinated by Martin and R.U. Johnson under the auspices of the Century, and Tesla would help in the preparations. But disagreements with Tom Edison, Elihu Thomson, and Mikhail Pupin had peaked, and Tesla declined an invitation to a dinner of all the participants. "I cannot explain, but it is really impossible for me to join the company," he said. Edison was about to join forces with Marconi. Thomson was still pirating Tesla's induction motor, Pupin the Tesla oscillators. Stetson, as Morgan's Attorney General, could smooth over the bumps in GE's attempts to lay the groundwork for a pooling of patents with Westinghouse. GE would get the AC polyphase system in exchange for the Vanderpool trolley patents, but he could never erase the growing vendetta against Tesla by a number of key men in his industry. This was a particularly difficult time for Martin, and so a gap between Martin and Tesla began to form. At the end of January, Tesla sponsored another lavish feast, followed by a tour of his lab. He invited John Jacob Astor and his stunning wife, Ava Willing, and Mr. and Mrs. Stamford White. Due to the late hour, Lady Astor was dreadfully disappointed to pass on the electrical pyrotechnics. However, White and Company were able to take advantage of the entire affair. "My dear Tesla," wrote White, "I cannot tell you how impressed I was the other night at your laboratory, and how delighted I was to be there." Signing the letter, "Affectionately yours," White also congratulated Tesla on his address at Buffalo, which was so full of beautiful thoughts. This was White's second visit to the lab, and his feelings for Tesla continued to grow. March 28, 1896. Dear Luca, I happen to be free this evening. If you have visitors, ordinary mortals, I will not come. If you have Paderewski, Röntgen, or Mrs. Anthony, I will come. Yours sincerely, T.G.I. Tesla, great inventor, had met Paderewski for the first time at a dinner at the Johnson Salon in April of 1896. After an invitation from Robert, Tesla wrote back, "Hope that Mr. Paderewski will come." He was referring to Paderewski's trademark, a lush, unbridled mane which flared above his head as he played the piano during his concerts. Referring to this first meeting, Johnson wrote, "Like Tesla, he, Paderewski, has a marvelous mind, which is a storehouse of knowledge on all sorts of topics." Johnson, who had written a poem about the virtuoso, likened Paderewski's music to choiring angels in paradise. Latter-day Prime Minister of Poland, Paderewski was the highest-paid performer of the decade. Richard Watson Gilder, editor-in-chief at the Century, frequently invited, in Paderewski's words, all the great visiting artists, musicians, distinguished writers, sculptors, painters, and politicians who came to America. A connoisseur of art and of life, Gilder appreciated and recognized at once the unusual in everything, in people as well. Through Gilder, Johnson met many luminaries, and through Johnson, Tesla followed. At the same time, in the spring of 1896, Tesla and the Johnsons were busy reading Rudyard Kipling's recently published Jungle Book. "The stories of Kipling's are charm itself," Tesla wrote Mrs. Philipov. "I think Rikki Tikki Tavi is the best." 2 days later, a party for Kipling was organized at the Johnson home. "Sorry, I cannot come to dinner," Tesla wrote, "but will show up as soon as possible afterwards." Kipling, who was 30 at the time, had purchased a house from his brother-in-law in Brattleboro, Vermont, where he had written the Jungle Book, and now he had come to New York to help promote it. Much like Twain, Kipling was known as a globetrotter, having visited such places as Ceylon, India, New Zealand, and Australia. After the party and his stay in New York, Kipling travelled to England and then on to South Africa. On the boat trip over, he ran into John Hayes Hammond, and when he reached Cape Town, he talked Cecil Rhodes into giving him a tour of the front lines of the Boer War. Upon his return to New York in early 1899, he spent time with Tesla before another formal dinner in his honor was prepared by the Johnsons. The following letter, although written 3 years later, reflects the kind of friendship the two men shared. Dear Mrs. Philipov, what is the matter with ink spiller Kipling? He actually dared to invite me to dine in an obscure hotel where I will be sure to get hair and cockroaches in the soup. On the very day of the party, Kipling rocked the world, for he was taken ill with typhoid and nearly died. Catherine would spend the next few months helping to take care of the ailing novelist. Kipling survived the ordeal, but tragically his daughter Josephine perished. He was in such a weakened condition that his wife was forced to hide the young girl's death from him until he was well enough to be able to handle the news. As the newspapers carried daily reports of Kipling's condition on their front pages, the world mourned the young girl's loss, just as they rejoiced with his recovery. Having experienced family tragedy in his own life, Tesla hoped that the death would not impair Kipling's ability to write. "I am delighted Kipling has recovered," Tesla told the Johnsons. "I just hope there will be no evil consequences, except a sorrow, though hard to bear." Philosophically, Tesla added, "It will probably give his works more dignity and depth." Do not thus drift with the mob. I invite you to join me in a month's worship with nature in the high temples of the great Sierra Crown beyond our holy Yosemite. It will cost you nothing save the time, and very little of that, for you will be mostly in eternity. John Muir. Another frequent visitor to the Johnson household was the conservationist and poet John Muir, who a few years earlier had taken Johnson on a tour of Yosemite, what Muir called the great creations of the Almighty. On his trips to New York, Muir typically dressed in a seasoned three-piece suit, complete with a gold watch dangling from a high vest pocket, but his demeanor was mountain man all the way. 60 years old, still in his prime, his hair was grey and long, and his face adorned with a beard that extended to his navel like scraggy sagebrush. His eyes may have sparked in different directions because of an early industrial accident, but his gaze proclaimed the aura of an enlightened one. Having dined with Muir at the Johnsons during the holiday season, and having invited the naturalist back to his lab, Tesla later told Catherine that he appreciated Muir's contribution to society. "I am always grateful to Muir," he wrote, "for his magnificent description of Yosemite Valley, which I have read through in one breath." A founder of the Sierra Club with Johnson, Muir was, in a sense, Tesla's doppelganger. Muir was a somewhat unkempt naturalist who spent most of his time in the forest, but part of him longed for civilization, and Tesla, ever the fastidious and smartly dressed metropolitan, spent most of his life in the city, but longed for the mountains. A former inventor himself, having fashioned an award-winning bed that toppled the sleeper out onto the floor in the morning, Muir was not opposed in principle to human progress, only to callous obliteration of the precious wonders of the planet. Since Tesla's inventions sought to utilize renewable energy and minimize destruction of natural resources, in that sense both Tesla and Muir shared a common end. Muir's writings remain his most powerful statement to the spiritual path. The importance of his friendship with Tesla helped support the modern concepts conservation and ecological thinking. Placing it all in perspective, Muir wrote, "Who wouldn't be a mountaineer? Up here, all the world's prizes seem nothing." 22. Sorcerer's Apprentice, 1896–97. Tesla had his rooms in the laboratory on Houston Street darkened, and a current was turned on invisibly. As the group gazed at this, the apartment was filled with a terrific lightning display, with the snapping, crackling sound displacing the reverberation of heaven's artillery, and all remarked the weird and awing effect of the exhibition. His face lighting up and his spare figure vibrant with pride, Tesla announced, "I am producing an electrical disturbance of intense magnitude, which by means of certain simple instruments can be felt and appreciated at any point of the globe without the aid or intervention of wires of any kind at all." New York Journal. One of Tesla's most ardent admirers was Yale student Lee De Forest, who had studied the inventor's collected works the previous semester. "Tesla's writings are the greatest exciters to zealous work and study," De Forest wrote in his diary. "His New York laboratory is a fabulous domain into which all ambitious young electrical students aspire to enter and there remain. How I pray that I may equal or excel him, that all this belief in my genius is not idle and conceit." In May 1896, De Forest was able to arrange a visit to the East Houston Street den. "Now is the critical point in the curve of my life," the youth scribbled on his pad as he sat on the train waiting for his stop, "for I am about to seek work with Nikola Tesla." The expert greeted the novice and gave him a tour, but was unable to take him on as an apprentice. Noticing the dejected countenance on the budding inventor's face, Tesla told De Forest, "I see a great future for you, as you are endowed with a keen mind. "You will not need this job to succeed." Tesla wished him well and suggested De Forest contact him again. De Forest would apply once more in the spring of 1898, and probably again in 1900 or 1901, but for various reasons he was never hired. In retrospect, Tesla's decision to reject the talented engineer was unfortunate, for De Forest would soon rise to a premier position as a pioneer in the field of wireless communication. He had a commercial mind and became a tenacious rival to Tesla's other young competitor, Guglielmo Marconi. Throughout 1896, Tesla applied for and received 8 patents on his wireless system. These were mostly different types of oscillators for generating electromagnetic currents of high frequency and high potential. His first application, specifically in the field of radio communication, was in 1897. His second, remote control, in 1898. Earlier patents on oscillators, dating back to 1891 and 1893, also covered this work, though in veiled form. Over the next 5 years, the inventor's arsenal grew to 33 fundamental patents, covering all essential areas of transmitting electrical energy through the natural medium. As part of his overall scheme, Tesla also began working on perfecting a system of telephotography. His interest could be traced to 1893 and the Chicago World's Fair, where Elisha Gray's teleautographic machine was displayed. But over the summer of 1896, competition peaked, especially when Edison announced his plans to market an autographic telegraph. "I'm getting it ready for you newspaper fellows," Edison said, "and when I get working, all you will have to do is hand your copy to the operator, say in New York, for example. The cover will be shut down, and presto! The wires will transmit it letter for letter to the machine at the other end in Buffalo. The wires will transmit 20 square inches of copy a minute, and will carry sketches and pictures as well." In attempts to outdo Edison, Tesla told the New York Herald of his own advances. Under the imaginative assumptions that images from the retina could be captured and transmitted, Tesla included this esoteric idea along with a more realistic plan to transmit text and pictures over the phone lines and by wireless. Even today, the facsimile machine holds a special place in our imagination, for something typed in an office in New York can be transmitted instantaneously by satellite or over the phone lines to a receiver in San Francisco, Moscow, or Tokyo. One can only imagine the sense of disbelief facing Tesla as he tried to convince readers that pictures could be sent by means of wireless from one city to another. Even primitive Morse-coded messages had yet to really be effectively transmitted. Nevertheless, Marconi was closing in rapidly on successfully demonstrating his wireless apparatus as Tesla scoured the libraries to study the history of telephotography. Tesla traced early work in inventions that led to the development of the facsimile machine and television to English physicist Alexander Bain, who in 1842 first transmitted pictures by using a grid of electrical wires embedded in wax held firmly beneath a sheet of chemically treated paper. All of these wires could be channeled into one cable and strung to a receiving station, where an identical grid was constructed. If the receiver traced out the letter A, for instance, with an electric stylus, the particular wires comprising the design of the letter would be electrified, and these in turn would treat that area of the paper on the receiving end to spell out the matching character. Autographs and drawings could also be transmitted in the same manner. As the process evolved, pictures could be broken down into a finite number of picture elements so that they could also be dispatched. In the 1860s, this grid was replaced by a single wire through the implementation of spinning disks and perfect synchronism between transmitter and receiver. Tesla's synchronous AC motor helping augment the procedure in the late 1880s and early 1890s. With the development of the photographic process, the first wireless pictures were sent in 1898 by Custer and G. Williams, but the arrangements involved the employment of Hertz waves and were impracticable. In 1892, Tesla recalled many years later, the attention of the scientific world was directed to a wonderfully sensitive receiver consisting of an electron stream maintained in a delicately balanced condition in a vacuum bulb, by means of which it was proposed to use photography in the transmission of telegraphic and telephonic messages through the Atlantic cables and later also by wireless. In 1904, Dr. Arthur Korn, an electrical engineer from the University of Munich, gained the attention of the scientific community when he successfully transmitted wire photos from Munich to Nuremberg. According to Korn, who is often credited as the inventor of the television tube, the apparatus utilized Tesla currents. Tesla notes that once Korn introduced a sensitive place and a selenium cell to vary the intensity of the sending current, the process, which is called the television, advanced a great step. Korn's tube is excited by a high-frequency current supplied from a Tesla transformer and may be flashed up many thousand times per second, thereby attaining the moving television image. Tesla dates Korn's first experiments to 1903. A May 1899 article states that Tesla was working on a visual telegraphy system with the light-sensitive element selenium, thus predating Korn's work by 4 years. It is probable that Tesla was replicating the experiments of Custer and Williams on precursors to the video camera, although Korn, not Tesla, perfected it. In essence, the modern television works in a way analogous to Bain's first 1842 construction. An electronic tube, similar to Tesla's brush vacuum tube, is moved across an entire TV screen in an instant. During its pass over the area where the image is formed, it releases synchronized impulses for each pixel. The position of the beam and its precise sequence of firing are directed by impulses stemming from the broadcast station. Each pass over the entire screen creates a separate image that, when played in sequence, portrays natural moving pictures. Tesla followed the advances in the field of telephotography as they occurred and experimented himself. His first task was to figure out the optimal way to transmit the energy. Having tested the Hertz spark gap apparatus, Tesla found that this device, which Marconi was utilizing, was subject to static interference and involved arbitrary pulsed, damped frequencies that were weak. They transmitted themselves transversely through the air and did not take into account longitudinal properties which were augmented when making use of extremely high potentials and a ground connection. Working out calculations that took into account the speed of light and the size of the Earth, Tesla designed carefully constructed continuous, undamped electromagnetic waves that were in harmony with those of the planet. By 1897, Tesla amassed all of the essential patents for generating, modulating, storing, transmitting, and receiving wireless impulses. In a letter to his lawyer, Parker W. Page, Tesla wrote, "I forward herewith Monsieur Marconi's patent, which was just allowed. I notice that the signals have been described as being due to Hertzian waves, which is not the case. In other words, the patent describes something entirely different than what actually takes place. How far does this affect the validity of the patent?" Clearly, Tesla already suspected that Marconi was utilizing his equipment. In Tesla's first patent, specifically for wireless transmission, number 649,621, filed on September 2, 1897, he discusses the need for a terminal, preferably of large surface, maintained by such means as a balloon at an elevation suitable for the purposes of transmission, and another terminal of the secondary connected to the Earth. At the receiving station, a transformer of similar construction is employed. The specification goes on to describe how the wavelengths can be constructed and modified so as to tune the circuits and take into account the natural properties of electromagnetic energy. Having taken into account the size and capacity of the Earth, Tesla had calculated that with a coil 50 miles in length, oscillating at 925 times per second, a resonant relationship to the frequency of light was realized. Since he had worked with exhausted tubes, Tesla knew that electricity traveled more easily through them than through air. Thus he reasoned, if his transmission towers were placed on high elevations, above obstructions and further raised by the use of balloons, the upper atmosphere or ionosphere itself would serve as a means of transmission. Large power stations located near waterfalls would supply the energy necessary for the wireless transmission to this upper stratum. In a separate way, the Earth itself would also serve as a medium. The following passage from the same 1897 patent application criticized Marconi's use of the more primitive Hertzian apparatus. It is to be noted that the phenomenon here involved in the transmission of electrical energy is one of true conduction, and is not to be confounded with the phenomena of electrical radiation, which have heretofore been observed, and which from the very nature and mode of propagation would render practically impossible the transmission of any appreciable amount of energy to such distance as are of practical importance. Marconi, who was working with Lloyd's of London in ship-to-shore experiments, was using a more trial-and-error method. In July 1896, in experiments with Preece, the Italian had successfully transmitted messages through walls and over distances of 7 or 8 miles. In December, he applied for a patent, which Preece felt was very strong, although he knew the youngster had been anticipated by Lodge and Tesla. The patent was not original, and it did not put forth any new principles. Nevertheless, Marconi was definitely succeeding in the real world, while Tesla advanced in his laboratory in refinements of apparatus and in the theoretical realm. The differences in sophistication of knowledge on the subject are aptly described by one of Marconi's associates, Mr. Vivian. "We knew nothing then about the effect of the length of a wave transmitted governing the distance over which communication could be effected," the colleague stated. "We did not even have the means or instruments for measuring wavelength. In fact, we didn't know accurately what wavelength we were using." Preece's initial work in his study of earth currents and induction effects generating from normal telegraphic lines in the 1880s and 1890s led him to realize the strength of Tesla's system. Marconi, at that stage, had no understanding of the role of the Earth in conveying electrical energy. He was utilizing the principle of radiation through the air according to Hertz's apparatus. Without understanding why, he did make use of an aerial and ground connection, but this setup had already been published widely in 1893 by Tesla. Other principles were taken from Oliver Lodge, who was in a patent dispute with Guglielmo Marconi. William Preece was well aware that they had been anticipated, but he could also see Marconi advance markedly while his precursors basically stood still. After Marconi rejected Preece's suggestion that they request the use of Tesla's apparatus, the British nobleman was placed in a conflictual situation. In August 1897, he mailed off a terse dispatch. "I regret to say that I must stop all experiments and all action until I learn the conditions that are to determine the relations between your company and the British government departments who have encouraged and helped you so much." But the die was cast, and Preece became helpless to stop what he knew was a complex form of piracy. He became ill and retreated to Egypt, where he stayed a year. Marconi was also being aided by H.M. Hosier, director of Lloyd's, who, according to one account, succeeded in sending reasonably clear messages through Hosier's apparatus, in one place at least where Marconi himself had failed. Lloyd's also contacted Tesla to rig up a wireless set ship-shore in 1896 to report the international yacht race. But Tesla refused the offer, claiming that any public demonstration of his system on less than a worldwide basis would be confused with the amateurish effort being made by other experimenters. Instead, Tesla performed a long-distance clandestine experiment which he told no one about, not even his workers. Sometime in 1896 or early 1897, the inventor turned on his generator to produce continuous trains of oscillations and took a cab to the Hudson River. There he caught a boat and ferried up to West Point with a battery-operated machine suitable for transportation. "I did this 2 or 3 times, he told the courts in 1915. "But there were no signals actually given. I simply got the note, but that was for me just the same." In other words, having brought a receiving instrument with him, the inventor simply tuned it to the point where it began to respond to the oscillations emanating from his laboratory back at East Houston Street. "That is, I think, a distance of about 30 miles, Tesla said. Tesla also considered harnessing wind power, the tides, solar and geothermal energy, and also energy released during the process of electrolysis. If water was separated into oxygen and hydrogen, these explosive substances could theoretically be used to generate the heat to create steam. Working along varying lines of research, Tesla also patented ozone production machines and devised a scheme whereby nitrogen from the air would be electrically separated out and blended with conveyor belts of soil to create a fertilizer machine. All the agriculturist needs, Tesla suggested, is to shovel a quantity of loose earth, treated by a secret chemical preparation in liquid form, into the cylinder. An electric current is passed through the confined atmosphere. The oxygen and hydrogen are expelled, and the nitrogen, which remains, is thus absorbed into the loose earth. There is thus produced a strong fertilizer for a nominal price right at the farmer's home. On April 6, 1897, Tesla spoke again to the public at the New York Academy of Sciences. Over 4,000 people attended. With large photographs of dozens of radio tubes Tesla had designed gracing the walls, Tesla set out to explain his advances in Röntgen rays. Certainly the audience was interested in seeing a remarkable device that revealed the human skeleton to a living person, but unquestionably most of them came to behold the sorcerer hurl his thunderbolts. Tesla's world telegraphy system had finally come into clear focus. His plan was to disturb the electrical capacity of the Earth with gigantic Tesla oscillators and thereby use these Earth currents themselves as carrier waves for his transmitter. In 1897, he explained precisely how his world telegraphy system would operate. Suppose the whole Earth to be like a hollow rubber ball filled with water, and at one place I have a tube attached with a plunger. If I press upon the plunger, the water in the tube will be driven into the rubber ball, and as the water is practically incompressible, every part of the surface of the ball will be expanded. If I withdraw the plunger, the water follows it, and every part of the ball will contract. Now, if I pierce the surface of the ball several times and set tubes and plungers at each place, the plungers in these will vibrate up and down in answer to every movement which I may produce in the plunger of the first tube. There is a peculiar addition to this paragraph. If I were to produce an explosion in the center of the body of water in the ball, this would set up a series of vibrations in the whole body. If I could then set the plunger in one of the tubes to vibrating in consonance with the vibrations of the water, in a little while and with the use of very little energy, I could burst the whole thing asunder. The water corresponds to terrestrial currents, which are today known as telluric currents, and the plungers refer to his transmitters and receivers. The inventor thinks it possible that his machine, when perfected, may be set up, one in each great center of civilization, to flash the news of the day's or hour's history immediately to all other cities of the world. And stepping for a sentence out of the realms of the workaday world, he offers a prophecy that any communication we may have with other stars will certainly be by such a method. This article, which appeared in Scribner's, also discussed Marconi's successful wireless transmission of 8 miles in Europe. We see in these passages, stemming from 1896 and 1897, that Tesla had already conceived of a total plan for his world telegraphy system, and that it utilized a variety of wireless modes, one being through the upper air strata, another by means of mechanical resonance, which he called telegeodynamics, and a third, and his most important, by riding terrestrial currents. His next plan was to measure precisely the frequency of the planet and construct transmitters in harmonic relations to it. Nodal points could then be mapped out from, say, a wireless transmitter placed at Niagara Falls to precise positions for receiving towers on different continents. For all intents and purposes, no one, except for Marconi, had demonstrated that wireless messages could be transmitted more than a few hundred feet. And success only involved the modest goal of sending Morse-coded messages. Marconi's next plan, which would capture the world's attention, was to radiate the impulses across the English Channel. Certainly Tesla had demonstrated all of the principles found in the modern radio years earlier, but his public demonstrations were held within lecture halls. He had established that he could illuminate lamps from a transmitter placed on the roof of his laboratory on Houston Street to his hotel 26 blocks away, but these experiments were held in secret and were never publicized. The 1895 fire also thwarted his efforts to display long-distance effects. And when Lloyd's of London contacted him, to the dismay of his secretary George Sheff, Tesla rejected the offer to demonstrate his system's capabilities. Tesla, however, was not content with merely setting up a world broadcasting system that, from a conceptual perspective, is superior to our prevailing technology in that it would transmit power as well as information. He also suggested that he could contact the stars, create rain in the deserts, or cause wide-scale havoc. Tesla became the quintessential mad scientist. Through his inventions, the world could be dominated according to whim. The contradictions within the inventor began to pull him in opposite directions. In letters to the Johnsons, he calls himself Tesla, Great Inventor, and implies that, like Paderewski and other luminaries, he was not a mere mortal. But during his Niagara Falls speech, he denigrated himself. Tesla was somewhat wealthy during this period, but the requirements of his operations were beyond his means, and yet Tesla shunned billing engineers when they sought his aid and voided a royalty contract with Westinghouse, though it was now worth a fortune. In June 1897, it was reported that Westinghouse had paid $216,000 for his patents. As Tesla and his partners Brown and Peck were receiving yearly checks of $15,000 with an initial down payment of probably $70,000, this works out to about $250,000 for a 10-year period. In a letter to Astor, Tesla places the figure at $500,000, but in either case it was still millions of dollars less than its actual value. By this time, Westinghouse and GE had formalized their entente cordiale. This meant that a second gigantic corporation with numerous subsidiaries would be benefiting from Tesla's invention, but the inventor would not receive a dime for it. The electric subway trains would also be implementing the Tesla motors and system, and again, the inventor would get no compensation. Tesla's new plans would require enormous expenditures. Westinghouse was making it clear that his company would not be a source of funds beyond their former signed agreement, although it is possible that Tesla did receive additional revenues for other inventions, such as for his oscillators. At the end of the year, the inventor wrote to his friend Ernest Heinrich, an engineer at the Westinghouse Corporation who also was a novelist. "My dear Heinrich," Tesla wrote, "it is true that I have not been quite well of late. I can assure you that I am physically and mentally all right at present. I have, however, still a little ailment which may be best designated as financial anemia, from which you are yourself suffering, if I am not mistaken. I wish you would remember me to all the boys at about Christmas time, for it is just possible that some of them might feel disposed to send me a token." There were other pressures as well. Tesla was having difficulties with his financial backer Edward Dean Adams, who was opposing his efforts to promote his wireless enterprise. There was this continuing competition with Marconi, and there were the painful echoes of his Serbian past from Kosovo and his lost youth. His parents and brother were dead, and he was away from his family not just in distance, but also in spirit. In yet another of so many letters sent, sisters Maritza and Angelina pleaded for a response. Tesla had sent funds on many occasions and a copy of his Martin text, but they wanted more. "Remember what your name is and where you come from," Maritza wrote, ending her letter with the customary "I am kissing you in spirit." Part of him ached from the pain, and just as he was coasting high and ahead of the pack on the crest of the wave. Maybe it was the influence of the Boer War or the unrest brewing in Cuba, but Tesla's destructive streak began to emerge. His previous inventions were already reshaping human events. His newest creation could interlink every remote hamlet or tear the world apart. He decided to experiment. With George Scherf present, Tesla placed one of his mechanical oscillators on the center support beam in the basement of the Houston Street building where his laboratory was located, and adjusted the frequency to the point where the beam began to hum. While he was attending to something else for a few moments, it attained such a crescendo of rhythm that it started to shake the building. Then it began shaking the earth near about and other buildings with support beams in resonant frequencies. The fire department responded to an alarm frantically turned in. 4 tons of machinery flew across the basement, and the only thing which saved the building from utter collapse was the quick action of Dr. Tesla in seizing a hammer and destroying his machine. The device could be a Frankenstein's monster, Tesla confided many years later. If not watched, no substance can withstand the steadily applied rhythm when its resonance point is reached. Skyscrapers could easily be destroyed with the steady build-up of resonance from the time strokes of a 5-pound hammer. In another rendition of the story, told at another time, Tesla claimed that he had taken his alarm clock-sized oscillator to a building site in the Wall Street district. Finding one under construction, about 10 stories high of steel framework, he clamped the vibrator to one of the beams and fussed with the adjustment until he got it. In a few minutes, I could feel the beam trembling, Tesla told a reporter. Gradually, the trembling increased in intensity and extended throughout the whole great mass of steel. Finally, the structure began to creak and weave, and the steel workers came to the ground panic-stricken, believing there had been an earthquake. Rumors spread that the building was about to fall, and the police reserves were called out. Before anything serious happened, I took off the vibrator, put it in my pocket, and went away. But if I had kept on 10 minutes more, I could have laid that building flat in the street, and with the same vibrator I could drop the Brooklyn Bridge into the East River in less than an hour. Tesla told the reporter that he could split the earth in the same way, putting an end to mankind. The vibrations of the earth, he said, have a periodicity of approximately 1 hour and 49 minutes. That is to say, if I strike the earth this instant, a wave of contraction goes through it that will come back in 1 hour and 49 minutes in the form of expansion. As a matter of fact, the earth, like everything else, is in a constant state of vibration. It is constantly contracting and expanding. Now suppose that at the precise moment when it begins to contract, I explode a ton of dynamite. That accelerates the contraction, and in 1 hour and 49 minutes there comes an equally accelerated wave of expansion. When the wave of expansion ebbs, suppose I explode another ton, and suppose this performance be repeated time after time. Is there any doubt as to what would happen? There is no doubt in my mind. The earth would be split in two. For the first time in man's history, he has the knowledge with which he may interfere with cosmic processes. Tesla calculated that this procedure might take more than a year to succeed. But in a few weeks, Tesla said, I could set the Earth's crust into such a state of vibration that it would rise and fall hundreds of feet, throwing rivers out of their beds, wrecking buildings, and practically destroying civilization. The principle cannot fail. 23. Frill Power, 1898. We entered an immense hall, lighted by a lustre, but diffusing a fragrant odour. The floor was in large tessellated blocks of precious metals, and partly covered with a sort of mat-like carpeting. A strain of low music, above and around, undulated as if from invisible instruments. In a simpler garb than that of my guide, a figure was standing motionless near the threshold. My guide touched it twice with his staff, and it put itself into a rapid and gliding movement, skimming noiselessly over the floor. Gazing on it, I then saw that it was no living form, but a mechanical automaton. Several other automata stood dumb and motionless by the walls. The Coming Race, Edward Bulwer Lytton. One of Tesla's major inventions in terms of ingenuity, originality, and complexity of design was a remote-controlled robotic boat, which he called the teleautomaton. This device was unveiled at the Electrical Exposition held at Madison Square Garden during the height of the Spanish-American War in May 1898, but earlier precursors could be traced to wireless motors, which he displayed before the Institute of Electrical Engineers in 1892. This single invention not only established all of the essential principles of what came to be known a few years later as the radio, it also lay as the basis of such other creations as the wireless telephone, garage door opener, the car radio, the facsimile machine, television, the cable TV scrambler, and remote-controlled robotics. The precise nature of the invention, virtually its patent application, was published in most of the technical journals at the time of its inauguration. The teleautomaton paralleled precisely a model developed by British novelist Edward Bulwer-Lytton in 1871, although Tesla insisted in a missive to Johnson written 2 years after the invention's inauguration that he had not been inspired by this science fiction tale. As Bulwer-Lytton was perhaps the most popular author next to Charles Dickens at that time, it is unlikely that Tesla was unaware of this story when he conceived of the invention. In The Coming Race, Bulwer-Lytton describes a concept which he called vril power. This was an energy transmitted from the eye and body of the fictional advanced species which was used to animate automatons. In essence, Tesla built a working model that substituted electricity for the novelist's vril. The story begins when the protagonist falls into a hole in the earth and comes upon an advanced civilization. In all service, whether in or out of doors, they, the people of Vrilya, make great use of automaton figures, which are so ingenious and so pliant to the operations of vril that they actually seem gifted with reason. It was scarcely possible to distinguish the figures I beheld apparently gliding, the rapid movements of vast engines, from human forms endowed with thought. As we shall see, key aspects of Bulwer-Lytton's story correlate quite closely with the positions espoused by Tesla. The Electrical Exhibition was organized by Stanford White, who worked with Tesla to fashion a rainbow room of neon lights at the entrance, and it was presided over by Chauncey Depew, another Tesla friend who was also one of the principals of the New York Central Railroad and a U.S. Senator from New York. It had been hoped that President McKinley would illuminate the exposition by means of telegraph lines from Washington, but something went awry, so Vice President Garrett Hobart opened the proceedings instead. Representing the Marconi Company was Tom Edison's son, Tom Jr., who obtained the position through T.C. Martin. This liaison marked the beginning of a partnership between Marconi and Edison, as the Menlo Park wizard had wireless patents which the Italian wanted to own in order to boost his legal position on priority of discovery. The event also portended the upcoming break in the friendship between Tesla and Martin. Animosities between Spain and the United States had run high for a number of years, ever since 1895, when the Spaniards took repressive measures against rebelling Cubans. Many Americans began to champion the cause of Cuban annexation. The sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor in February of 1898 eliminated any doubts, and war was officially declared 2 months later. Tesla had been meeting with John Jacob Astor throughout this period in his continuing attempts to woo the financier, as Astor spelled out more clearly his position on relevant issues. While his wife played mahjong at home, the colonel jaunted along the deck of his mighty ship, the Nomaha, which he had armed with 4 machine guns in order to protect against potential pirates. Labeled as insipid and henpecked by gossip columnists, Astor sought his freedom on the high seas. Perhaps it was during an outing on Astor's yacht that the inventor conceived the idea of fashioning the teleautomaton in the form of a torpedo. "Come to Cuba with me, where you can demonstrate your work upon the insufferable scoundrels," Astor suggested. Tesla may have been tempted, but in the midst of a whirlwind of invention, he graciously declined, as he had been called, for a higher duty. Tesla finalized construction of his remote-controlled boat and considered how to make amends as Astor conferred with President McKinley in Washington and then hastened to the front lines. The colonel had donated $75,000 to the U.S. Army to equip an artillery division for use in the Philippines, and lent the Nomaha to the Navy for use in battle. The tall ship, nearly 100 yards in length, was equipped with a corps of military seamen. Able to feed 65 at one sitting, the steam-driven three-masted schooner made a formidable warship. With his honorary rank stepped up to Inspector General, Colonel Astor sailed his battalion down to Cuba, where he could watch Teddy Roosevelt in the Battle of San Juan Hill through a pair of field glasses. Beating the Spanish with modern instruments of destruction became the overriding theme of the exposition. Tesla would have far and away the most sophisticated construction, but he chose to portray it by deceptively emphasizing mysterious features. In demonstrating my invention before audiences, the visitors were requested to ask any question, however involved, and the automaton would answer them by signs. This was considered magic at the time, but it was extremely simple, for it was myself who gave the replies by means of the device. The boat, approximately 4 feet in length and 3 feet high, was placed in a large tank in the center of a private auditorium, set up for special viewing for key investors like J. O. Ashton, George Westinghouse, J. Pierpont Morgan, and Cornelius Vanderbilt. By means of a variety of transmitters and frequencies, the inventor could start, stop, propel, steer and operate other features, such as putting lights on or off. Tesla was also planning on constructing a prototype submersible, perhaps to compete in the mock battles that were staged between models of the American ships and the Spanish fleet, but it was never built. Due to the lack of access the press had to this exclusive invention, the newspapers featured Marconi's wireless detonation system instead. By means of a bomb planted on board the enemy frigate and a simple button placed in the hands of Tom Jr., Spanish ships were blown to smithereens. Marconi, however, had not solved the problem of tuning a frequency, and so on one occasion Edison's son accidentally blew up a desk in a back room that had housed other bombs. Fortunately, no one was injured. It appears that the public appreciated the dramatic Marconi contraption, which appealed to baser instincts as compared to Tesla's masterwork, which was 16 years ahead of its time operationally and at least a century ahead of its time conceptually, that is, as envisioned in final form. Only the scientific journals explained with any clarity the complexity of the design. Tesla's coy portrayal kindled a blitzkrieg of epithets from the press. The following fantastic prognostication particularly upset them. Torpedo boat without a crew. My submarine boat, loaded with its torpedoes, can start out from a protected bay or be dropped over a ship's side, make its devious way along the surface through dangerous channels of mine beds, watching for its prey, then dart upon it at a favorite moment, discharge its deadly weapon, and return to the hand that sent it. I am aware that this sounds almost incredible, and I have refrained from making this invention public until I had worked out practically every detail. By allowing the following editorial to appear in his journal Electrical Engineer, T.C. Martin was, in a backhanded way, another to lead the assault. Mr. Tesla and the Tsar. Mr. Tesla fools himself, if he fools anybody, when he launches into the dazzling theories and speculations associated with his name. Just of late, Mr. Tesla has been given publicity to some of his newest work. We should be glad, personally, to see him finish up some of the many other things that have occupied his energies these 10 years past. The editorial then went on to criticize Tesla's oscillator and his method of delivering large quantities of current without wires, say from Niagara Falls to Paris, which is also yet to happen. Mr. Marconi has already telegraphed from balloon to balloon without wires over 20 miles, thus proving in advance the tenability of Mr. Tesla's proposition. Discredit of the wireless torpedo followed. This was in reaction to Tesla's suggestion that the ultimate weapons could be devil automata. Caught up in war fever, Tesla emphasized nefarious implications of his work. Automatons would fight while humans would live. He wrote, "The continuous development in this direction must ultimately make war a mere context of machines without men and without loss of life, a condition which will lead, in my opinion, to permanent peace." This position was refuted by a number of individuals, the most eloquent by Frenchman Monsieur Huard. The genius of destruction. Like all inventors of destructive machines, Tesla claims that his devil automata will make the governments which are inclined to create international conflagrations hesitate. On this account, Nikola Tesla claims a right to be called a benefactor of humanity. The genius of destruction would seem to have then two aims. It creates evil, but mostly good. Through its help, the abolition of wars may no longer be a utopia of generous dreamers. A blessed era will open up to the people whose quarrels will be settled in view of the terror of the cataclysms promised by science. What contradictions of conception is the human mind subject to? Coincidentally, this view was espoused by Mark Twain, who wrote to Tesla from Europe wanting to sell the patents to cabinet ministers in Austria, Germany, and England, by Bulwer Lytton, and by Tsar Nicholas of Russia, whom Tesla himself was negotiating with. And that was how Nikola Tesla became associated with the Tsar. In the modern era, Edward Teller, one of the inventors of the hydrogen bomb, and more recently President Ronald Reagan in his 1980s Star Wars speeches, have also expounded on this position. But Tesla, much like Einstein, came to regret his initial view of how the agents of Armageddon could lead humans to peace. The brazen essay, which had appeared in Martin's journal, continued as an introduction to Tesla's thoughtful paper on electrotherapeutics, and then concluded with the following convoluted backhand compliment. It is not our desire to pose as apologists or publicists for Mr. Tesla. He needs no assistance of that kind. And so long as he commands freely whole pages of the Sunday papers, for which Mr. Wanamaker pays gladly his thousands of dollars, the scientific journals have little to do with the matter. All we wish to say is that it is not fair to condemn, as many do, Mr. Tesla as a visionary and impractical. No man has finished his work till he is dead, and even then there are long, long centuries in which his ideas can prove themselves true. The visionaries are thus often in the end the most sordid of realists, something Mr. Tesla will never be. As Martin had been, in a sense, Tesla's advance man, his decision to allow this critique in his journal became a tacit sanction for other writers to unfurl their condemnation. For instance, another scathing review appeared in both the Scientific American and the more popular Public Opinion. The article appeared on the same page as the obituary of mountebank inventor John Worrell Keely. Was Keely a charlatan? In the death of J.W. Keely of Keely motor fame, the world has been robbed of one of its most unique and fascinating characters. Keely was always going to startle the world, but never did. It is sincerely to be hoped that Keely's alleged secrets have died with him. Science and sensationalism. That the author of the multi-phase system of transmission should at this late date be flooding the press with rhetorical bombast that recalls the wildest days of the Keely motor mania is inconsistent and inexplicable to the last degree. The facts of Mr. Tesla's invention are few and simple as the fancies which have been woven around it are many and extravagant. The principles of the invention are not new, nor was Tesla the original discoverer. This implication that Tesla was not the author of his system of wireless communication echoed previous charges that he was not the genuine inventor of the AC polyphase system. This was what particularly angered him, as it was essential that his work be original. "I wish I could lay upon the fellow all the forked lightning in my laboratory," Tesla told the Johnsons at dinner at their home. "Perhaps it would be more effective if an outside person came to your defense," Robert suggested. "My dear Luca, I know that you are a noble fellow and devoted friend, and I appreciate your indignation at these uncalled-for attacks, but I beg you not to get involved under any condition, as you would offend me. Let my friends do their worst. I like it better so. Let them spring on scientific society's worthless schemes, oppose a cause which is deserving, throw sand into the eyes of those who might see. They will reap their reward in time. Then how can we redress such an outrageous individual? Let us have a profound contempt for the creature," Tesla concluded. "I don't see Comerford in this same category," Catherine offered, trying to set the stage for a reconciliation. I know you and Luca want me to forgive your friend Martin for his disparaging editorial. It was well done, but not so painstakingly as many others before. He renders me more and more valuable services." "At least talk to him," Catherine pleaded. Tesla grabbed his hat, coat and gloves and waved his hand. "Sorry for him, that is all," he said as he departed. Tesla counterattacked with a spirited response to Electrical Engineer, which they were forced to publish. "On more than one occasion you have offended me, but in my qualities both as Christian and philosopher I have always forgiven you and only pitied you for your errors. This time, though, your offence is graver than the previous ones, for you have dared to cast a shadow on my honor. Being a bearer of high honors from a number of American universities, it is my duty, in view of this slur, to exact from you a complete and humble apology. On this condition, I will again forgive you, but I would advise you to limit yourself in your future attacks to statements for which you are not liable to be punished by law." Tesla, of course, was angry with the general tone of the editorial, but what particularly upset him was the implication that he had abandoned his mechanical and electrical oscillators and his cold lamps without filaments, fluorescent lights. He was in the midst of negotiating a large business transaction with a number of investors, particularly Astor. In no way did he want there to be any implication that these endeavors were being abandoned. Martin's rebuttal was published right after Tesla's letter. His friends to Mr. Tesla. One foremost electrical inventor, unnamed, probably Elihu Thomson, has been kind enough to say that the electrical engineer made Mr. Tesla. This statement was disputed by Martin as a person's actions make the person. However, the journal, i.e. Martin, did cite the fact that in the past it published Tesla's articles and book of his inventions and lectures, and furthermore that it was their editor who had striven with all the ability possessed to explain Mr. Tesla's ideas. This is completely true. For an 8-year period, 1890 to 98, Electrical Engineer published 167 articles by or about Tesla, 40 more than Electrical Review and 70 more than Electrical World. Moreover, it was clearly Martin who choreographed the reclusive inventor's entree into the American electrical arena. As Tesla often promised more than he delivered, the journal, as a true friend, felt an obligation to urge him to complete a long trial of beautiful but unfinished inventions. They, i.e. Martin, also took keen exception to the fantastic statement about Tesla's remote-controlled flying machine that could change its direction in flight, explode at will, and never make a miss. Martin continued. Our past admiration of Mr. Tesla's real, tangible work is on record and stands, but we draw the line at such things as these. We're sorry Mr. Tesla feels so keenly, but we cannot help it. Given that this assault stemmed from one of Tesla's closest allies, it bears careful consideration. However, from a historical perspective, we should also consider hidden agendas. For instance, in 1894, Tesla was freely distributing his collected works and not paying for additional copies. I made some money out of my Tesla book, Martin confessed to Elihu Thomson many years later, but it was promptly borrowed from me by the titular component, so 2 years of work went for nothing. The following year, in 1895, Tesla's laboratory burned to the ground, and Martin wrote an admirable tribute. Perhaps this is why he did not insist Tesla repay him. Martin had been placed in an awkward position, for he was also a good friend of Tom Edison's, a powerful Tesla rival, and as a reporter he had to be objective in covering advances from other rivals such as Marconi. Tesla's irritating habit of living beyond his means and seeing projects completed before they actually materialized was forever a source of frustration to his longtime protector. And history has so proved in many ways that Martin was right. Tesla's oscillators were never a commercial success. His wireless system of distributing light, information and power in its total form was never realized. And for reasons difficult to understand, Tesla's fluorescent lights were never marketed. On the other hand, Tesla was extremely prolific. He did build working models of all his inventions. For instance, the teleautomaton was a fully functioning prototype, and it takes many years for one's endeavors to come to fruition. Tesla had already proved himself in a variety of ways. That all of his projects never materialized is understandable, given the great scope of his efforts. Tesla's teleautomaton remains one of the single most important technological triumphs of the modern age. In its final form, it was conceived as a new mechanical species capable of thinking as humans do, capable of carrying out complex assignments, and even capable of reproduction. The invention also comprised all of the essential features of wireless transmission and selective tuning. Here was a true work of genius. Surprisingly, Tesla was an adherent of a stimulus-response model for explaining human behavior and consciousness, rather than a proponent of a model espousing a creative unconscious. The rivalry between Ernst Mach and Carl Stumpf, Tesla's philosophy teacher discussed earlier, and the work of Descartes on the self-propelled automata correlate to a number of key positions Tesla took which influenced directly the development of his teleautomaton. The mind, according to this proposition, was nothing more than a simple compilation of cause and effect sensations. What we call ideas were secondary impressions derived from these primary sensations. Paradoxically, although Tesla's achievement was highly original, and although he touted himself as the creator of new principles, in no way did the inventor think that he had ever produced a new idea that did not stem from something external, for example, a mechanism present in nature or deriving from the work of others. A reader of great philosophers, Tesla fully understood what the adoption of his teleautomaton would mean to the world. He clearly saw the implication in the coming race. Machines would not only replace laborers, they would think for themselves. Tesla's genius, therefore, was not only in the appreciation of the advanced thinking of others, but also, and more important, in implementing on a practical basis their abstract ideas. Whereas others sought to change the world with thoughts, Tesla manifested on the physical plane real working models. He certainly was the father of remote-controlled electronic beings, but he would have been the last person to claim that he was the father of the idea. In a famous article printed in the Century in 1900, Tesla explained the entire conceptualization behind his teleautomaton. "I have, by every thought and every act of mine, demonstrated, and do so daily, to my absolute satisfaction that I am an automaton endowed with a power of movement, which merely responds to external stimuli beating upon my sense organs, and thinks and acts accordingly. I remember only 1 or 2 cases in all my life which I was unable to locate the first impression which prompted a movement, or a thought, or even a dream." Tesla neglects to mention that one of these 2 instances was the revelation he had in Professor Purcell's class. He had seen that the commutator could be eliminated in the DC machines. In other words, Tesla's most successful invention, the AC polyphase system, was initiated from intuitive insight. Nevertheless, Tesla stubbornly clung to the tabula rasa premise. No inspiration, according to this pundit, began from within. Self-directed responses were initiated only after external stimuli were received. This is a complex idea, as it seems from the following paragraph that Tesla believes the reverse. How cosmic forces shape our destinies. Every living being is an engine geared to the wheelwork of the universe. There is no constellation or nebula, no sun or planet, that does not exercise some control over its destiny. Not in the vague and delusive sense of astrology, but in the rigid and positive meaning of physical science. More than this can be said. There is no thing endowed with life, from man who is enslaving the elements to the humblest creature in all the world, that does not sway in its turn. At the time he conceived these ideas, that is, in the early 1890s, Tesla was studying Herbert Spencer and also Buddhist writings. He even gave his friend Johnson a copy of a book on Buddhism to read. Nevertheless, the influence of Mach's principle and Newton's laws concerning such correlates as the angular momentum of the Earth, Sun, and galaxy also figured into his cosmological paradigm. The Buddhist expresses it one way, the Christian in another, but both say the same. We are all one. Science, too, recognizes this connectedness of separate individuals, though not quite in the same sense that it admits that the suns, planets, and moons of a constellation are one body, and there can be no doubt that it will be experimentally confirmed in times to come. Having studied will psychology, occult psychological principles, as a youth, Tesla was a firm believer in self-determination and the incredible power of the will. Somehow, however, he reconciled this internal procedure, which the philosopher George Gurdjieff links to a direct expression of the soul, to his external behavioristic paradigm. For Tesla, the spark of life is not only biological, but also present in the structure of matter. Even matter called inorganic, believed to be dead, responds to irritants and gives unmistakable evidence of a living principle within. Such things as metals respond to stimuli, e.g. magnets. Tesla refuses to separate the motive forces involved in electromagnetic effects from reactions of living matter. This, in essence, was Bulwer-Lytton's vril power. The energy that runs the universe directs life. Thus everything that exists, organic or inorganic, animated or inert, is susceptible to stimulus from the outside. There is no gap between, no break in continuity, no special and distinguishing vital agent. The momentous question of Spencer, what is it that causes inorganic matter to run into organic forms, has been answered. It is the sun's heat and light. Wherever they are, there is life. As Tesla himself was a self-propelled automaton entirely under the control of external influences, he could use the model of himself to build his teleautomaton. What we call memory, Tesla further stated, is but increased responsiveness to repeated stimuli. Creative thinking and also dreaming will be derived from secondary reverberations of these initial external stimuli. Long ago I conceived the idea of constructing an automaton which would mechanically represent me, and which would respond as I do myself, but of course in a much more primitive manner, to external influences. Such an automaton evidently had to have motive power, organs for locomotion, directive organs, and one or more sensitive organs so adapted as to be excited by external stimuli. Whether the automaton be of flesh and bone or of wood and steel, it mattered little, provided it could provide all the duties required of it like an intelligent being. To Tesla, his remote-controlled boat was not simply a machine. It was a new technological creation, endowed with the ability to think. In Tesla's view, it was also, in a sense, the first non-biological life form on the planet. As a prototype, this first new life form was embodied, in Tesla's words, with a borrowed mind, his own. It will be able to follow a course laid out, or obey commands given far in advance. It will be capable of distinguishing between what it ought and what it ought not to do, and of recording impressions which will definitely affect its subsequent actions. Very few individuals could comprehend the magnitude of the creation in 1898, and so they lashed out at Tesla instead. In November 1898, the Examiner-in-Chief of Patents came to witness a demonstration of Tesla's teleautomaton before granting a patent, so unbelievable was the claim. I remember that when later I called on an official in Washington with a view of offering the invention to the government, Tesla wrote, he burst out in laughter. Nobody thought then that there was the faintest prospect of perfecting such a device. 24. Waldorf Astoria, 1898. November the 29th, 1897. My dear Luca, I have concluded that so important a literary event as the appearance of your splendid book of poems should be firstly commemorated by a dinner at the Waldorf, as Mrs. Philippoff suggested in her peculiarly delicate way. As this does not seem possible because of your immense popularity, I would like you to name another evening very soon, however, for my money may run out. Yours sincerely, N. Tesla. The Waldorf Astoria was the tallest hotel in the world, a center for banquets, concerts, and conventions in the city, and the permanent or temporary residence of the wealthiest and most eminent citizens of the day. Residing there became a goal to which Tesla aspired. It would be one he would achieve before the end of the year, and one he would maintain for the next 2 decades. Built in 2 parts, the original Waldorf was completed by William Waldorf Astor in 1893, the Astoria by his cousin John Jacob Astor in late 1897. At first, Jack was reluctant to tear down his mother's home to erect a hotel, but after the Waldorf grossed $4.5 million in its first year, he changed his mind. Its opening marked the beginning of a new concept in living, extolling the essence of exclusiveness, cordiality, pomposity, and elegant grandiosity to the masses. The manager, George C. Bolt, was a Prussian immigrant from the island of Rügen, situated near Denmark in the Baltic Sea. Mild-mannered, dignified, and unassuming, Bolt resembled a typical German professor, with his close-cropped beard, which he kept fastidiously trimmed, and his pince-nez glasses on a black silk cord. Described also as a martinet and a man of mercurial moods, Bolt was a socialite in certain ways of the most superficial kind. "I would rather see Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish enjoying a cup of tea in an all but empty palm room," Bolt declared, "than a dozen lesser-known guests there feasting." The manager also adored mechanical contrivances, sprinkling the hotel with such modern conveniences as pneumatic tubes, electric bulb, carriage calls, flashing control panels on the elevators, and his network of hushed but authoritative buzzers. A few years later, the Waldorf would be the first hotel with a radio tower. No doubt Tesla himself, an elitist, was attractive to Bolt. With his position of inventor extraordinaire well established, it is likely that the inventor was accepted in a distinct class above the manager. Once he moved in, Tesla may even have avoided paying rent in lieu of his connection with Astor, or he may have negotiated a favorable deal. With over 900 on staff, the acclaimed Oscar of the Waldorf as chef, and Bolt's capable wife overseeing the decor, there was no finer establishment. A regal fragrance wafted from every corner of the hotel, with exquisite porcelain, exotic flowers, and expensive furniture decorating the halls, dining rooms, and suites. This was the alley where the peacocks came to strut. At over 6 foot 2 inches, and dressed in suede high tops, tails, cane, top hat, and ever-present white gloves, Nikola Tesla was one of the proudest and most renowned. The Spanish-American War dragged on through most of 1898, as Tesla continued to try to exploit his teleautomaton for use as a naval weapon. He had offered his wireless transmitters to aid in the organizing of ship and troop movements, but was turned down by the Secretary of the Navy for fear, as Tesla reported a year later, that I might cause a calamity, as sparks are apt to fly anywhere in the neighborhood of such apparatus when it is at work. Tesla tried to guarantee that he had overcome these defects and limitations, but it was to no avail. Public demonstrations and photographs of lightning bolts spewing from his ingenuity worked to hinder any assurances he might give. Instead, during the conflict, the Navy utilized hot air balloons connected to ships by telegraph lines instead. Being up in one would make a man's hair turn white, since the balloon was an easy target. The soldiers had to obey orders, and that was all there was to it. Tesla contacted shipbuilder Mr. Nixon, designer of the Oregon, the Villard ocean liner he had fixed while working for Tom Edison in 1884, and also submarine builder John P. Holland. 2 years later, Holland would sell the Navy its first submersible. It would weigh a commanding 74 tons and become a quintessential fighting machine. But in 1898, he was still having difficulty negotiating a deal. The Navy Department was obliged to decline Holland's offer to go into Santiago harbor and destroy the Spanish warships, as it smacked of privateering and was in violation of international law. And Tesla also invited military personnel to his laboratory, particularly U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Francis J. Higginson, chairman of the Lighthouse Board, to discuss the use of his wireless transmitters. But dealing with the government was anything but easy. During this period, in June 1898, Richmond Pearson Hobson rocketed to stardom, capturing the hearts of America through his heroic efforts in the war. A few months later, Hobson would become the key attraction of the Tesla-Johnson social net, and a decade after that, his fame so well established, he would become a presidential candidate. On June the 4th, the New York Times reported that a bold American fighting frigate, the Merrimac, had made a dash into Santiago harbor under a lively cannonade of fire in attempts to attack the waiting Spanish armada. The ship was sunk, and an officer, an engineer, and 6 seamen were taken prisoners. The Times concluded, "Everybody is astounded at the audacity of the American vessel." The following day, it was revealed that enemy fire had not sunk the ship at all. Rather, it had been deliberately scuttled by Lieutenant Hobson for the purpose of locking in the harbor the entire Spanish fleet. This splendid stroke effectively removed the feared Admiral Cervera from the war. In a day, in an hour, the potent, all-pervading force of electricity flashed his fame over the round world. As Hobson was imprisoned in the dungeon of Morro Castle, he continued to make headlines as the world waited for the war to end and his hoped-for release. As ever, Catherine continued to spread her Irish charms, inviting the Serbian mystic to dinner so that she could be hypnotized by his presence. The very day of the sinking of the Merrimac, the inventor received the following provocative missive. June the 6th, 1898. Dear Mr. Tesla, I want very much to see you tomorrow evening, and will be really disappointed if you do not think my request worthy of your consideration. Robert is giving himself a birthday party, and he's going to have some of your Serbian songs sung. You must save this evening for us. After this date, I am going away to Washington for a visit, so if anybody cares to see Mrs. Philippoff. When you come tomorrow evening, we'll talk about the hand which is before me now, but which is doomed to seclusion. I cannot stand it. It is too strong, too virile. When I enter the room without thinking, it makes me start. It is the only thing in it. But it is not satisfactory, for it does not give the proper idea of your hand, which is large and free. Like yourself, this seems sticky, short. I know what causes this. It is the shadows. You must try again and make your hand be as large and grand as it is. Faithfully yours, Catherine Johnson. In January, Tesla had published a full-page photograph of his hand for Electrical Review in his attempts to dramatically display the improvements he had made in the efficiency of his vacuum lamps. Every line on the palm was visible, so effective was the illuminant, although, as Catherine points out, the shape is marred by an underlying shadow. The famous palmist, Cairo, was the rage of the day, having published analyses of the hands of such celebrities as Tom Edison, Sarah Bernhardt, and theosophist Annie Besant. Mark Twain commented, "Cairo has exposed my character to me with humiliating accuracy. I ought not to confess this accuracy. Still, I am moved to do it." It seemed likely that Tesla's clever vanity had come upon a way to exploit his fluorescent tubes, and at the same time reveal in a veiled way the magnanimity of his being by exposing his hand to the world. Referring to a professional palmist, Tesla's hand supposedly reveals a flirtatious streak and hypersensitivity, seen in the girdle of Venus. From the headline, "Incessant worries stemming from the past," a close association with his mother, because it is tied to the heart line, an irrational streak and blind spot in his thinking, due to chaining, an undulating course and foreshortening of the line. And all of this is counterbalanced by a remarkable fate line, which, rising like a firm oak tree, reveals stability, vision, creative aspiration, stubbornness, and an ability to withstand great stress and turmoil. The fate line is the strongest line in the hand. During these months, playful banter peaked between the inventor and the elusive Madame Philippoff. It seems she tried to get Tesla married. In February, Catherine wrote, "Another charming lady is to be here who does not believe that you are my friend, that I even know you. I wish to convince her that you are on my list, and you shall sit beside her. Come and shed the radiance of your happy countenance upon us all, especially the Johnsons." In March, she demands Tesla join them for lunch, to bring solace to your friends, and a few days later invites him over again. "A very charming girl is to be here who wants very much to meet Mr. Tesla." "A real one," I assure you. Tesla decides to have everyone for dinner first, and writes, "I shall send my private equipage to dine at the Waldorf, and I am getting up the appetite for the occasion." Tesla's celibacy has always been a question mark. It seems probable that he and Catherine had engaged in a sticky liaison a few years earlier, but at this stage, due in part to Catherine's arrangements, Tesla had become active with other women, and Catherine had enjoyed his pleasures vicariously. 3 ladies who interested him were Mrs. Winslow, Miss Amarcia Kusner, and Miss Marguerite Merrington. The first, alas, was married. To the second, Tesla wanted to display his inventions at his laboratory. There is another reason why she should come, but that is difficult to say. Well, I do not want to say anything disparaging of a lady. For yet another Johnson blowout, Tesla wrote concerning the third lady, "I'd sooner be glad to rely on your choice, and only remember to suggest Miss Merrington, if she would come. I know I would be her victim before dinner, but after that I think I could hold my own, for she does not drink claret." And a few months later, March 9th, 1899. My dear Mrs. Johnson, I shall be glad to have any of your friends come, but we must have 1 lady for each gentleman, else you must dine without me. Agnes must come by all means, and wouldn't you invite Miss Merrington? She is such a wonderfully clever woman. I would say wise, had she but married. Really, I would like to have her with us. Sincerely, Nicholas I of Houston Street. Born in England, Marguerite Merrington was raised in a convent in Buffalo before she studied the piano and became a teacher at her alma mater, Normal College. Resigning to move to New York City to follow her passion of dramatic author, Miss Merrington first made headlines in 1891 with her well-received romantic play, Letterblair. This success was followed 2 years later when she won a $500 prize from the National Conservatory of Music for her libretto Daphne, which was reviewed by, among others, Antonin Dvorak. Tall, graceful, and charming, the regal Miss Merrington was a frequent dinner guest at the Johnson home. An integral part of the Gramercy Park set, Miss Merrington accompanied the young Owen Johnson to Mark Twain's birthday party in 1905 and maintained her creative spark throughout her life, writing a book on General Custer and his wife in 1950, the year before she died, unmarried, at the age of 91. In August 1898, John Jacob Astor returned from the battlegrounds, but it was not until December that Tesla met with Astor at his home. While Jack was considered by many to be cold-hearted, humorless, weak-minded, and almost completely absent of personality, his wife, Ava, was seen as the most beautiful woman in America. Tesla was particularly taken by Lady Astor's loveliness, and it seems that she was enthralled by the inventor's experiments. The 3 dined together on occasion at Delmonico's or the Waldorf, and when Tesla arrived at the Astor's residence, he often brought along a bouquet of flowers. But although Ava sparkled at every lighted candle, and Jack followed her about like a bedraggled and slightly bad-tempered spaniel, all was not well with the marriage. Where Astor was able to leave his exquisite wife for months on end, touring the high seas for adventure and the noble cause, she retreated by entertaining a zealous interest in bridge. Thus, even though Ava was on his side, the inventor was uncertain of his standing. "My dear Astor," Tesla began, "I would like to explain why I could not go down to Cuba with you." "I understand," Astor replied. "During the gunfire, perhaps, that is when it dawned on me. I realized that your life was too precious to risk on such a trip. I see, however, from recent reports that you have been attacked after all, but it has been by reporters instead." "I am glad," Tesla quipped, "that I am living in a place in which, though they can roast me in the papers, they cannot burn me at the stake." Tesla thereupon called a meeting with Astor and 2 of his cronies, Mr. Clarence Mackay and Mr. Darius Ogden Mills, so that he could display his continuing progress with his oscillators and fluorescent lights, as well as show them patent applications, articles which had appeared in the technical journals, and reports on tests performed by the Royal Society in London and the Röntgen Society in Germany. "Let me read you the following dispatch from Sir William Crookes," Tesla said. "Congratulations, The performance of your machine is marvelous." And Tesla presented another report which hailed his oscillator as one of the most significant of the age. "You will see how many enterprises can be built up on that novel principle, Colonel. It is for a reason that I am often and violently attacked, because my inventions threaten a number of established industries. My teleautomaton, for instance, opens up a new art which will sooner or later render large guns entirely useless, and will make impossible the building of large battleships, and will, as I have stated in my patent, long before the Tsar's manifesto, compel the nations to come to an understanding for the maintenance of peace." "You are taking too many leaps for me," Astor said, causing the others to reconsider as well. "Let us stick to the oscillators and cold lights. Let me see some success in the marketplace with these two enterprises before you go off saving the world with an invention of an entirely different order, and then I will commit more than my good wishes. Stop in again when you have a sound proposal, or call me on the telephone." Tesla waited until the new year, and then hit the Colonel with a direct assault. "My dear Astor," Tesla said, "it has always been my firm belief that you take a genuine, friendly interest in myself personally, as well as in my labors. Now I ask you frankly, when I have a friend like J.J.A., a prince among wealthy men, a patriot ready to risk his life for his country, a man who means every word he says, who puts such a value on my labors, and who offers repeatedly to back me up, have I not a foundation for believing that he would stand by me when, after several years of hard work, I have finally brought to commercial perfection some important inventions which even at the most conservative estimate must be valued at several $1 million. Informing Astor that George Westinghouse had given him $500,000 for the AC polyphase system, and that Edward Dean Adams had invested $100,000 to become a partner in his latest endeavors when he had 14 new U.S. and as many foreign patents, Tesla remarked that there was a powerful clique which still now opposed him. "And it is chiefly for this reason that I want a few friends like yourself to give me at this moment their valuable financial and moral support." Having placed faith in Astor's words, Tesla reveals that he had sold off securities to buy back control of his company, although Mr. Adams still has a minority interest. Having stated that his laboratory in the past has paid $1,500 for every $100 invested on the average, the inventor proclaims, "I am fully confident that the property which I have now in my hands will pay much better than this. I now produce a light superior by far to that of the incandescent lamp, with 1/3 of the expenditure of energy, and as my lamps will last forever, the cost of maintenance will be minute. The cost of copper, which in the old system is a most important item, is in mine reduced to a mere trifle, for I can run on a wire sufficient for one incandescent lamp more than 1,000 of my own lamps, giving fully 5,000 times as much light. Let me ask you, Colonel, how much is this alone worth when you consider that there are hundreds of millions of dollars invested today in electric light in the various chief countries in which I have patented my inventions in this field? Sooner or later," Tesla continues, "my system will be purchased either by the Whitney Syndicate, GE, or Westinghouse, for otherwise they will be driven out of the market." The inventor closed. "Then consider my oscillators, and my system of transmitting power without wires, my method of directing the movement of bodies at a distance by wireless telegraphy, the manufacture of fertilizers and nitric acid from the air, the production of ozone, and many other important lines of manufacture, as, for instance, cheap refrigeration and cheap manufacture of liquid air, etc. And you will see that, putting a fair estimate on all, I cannot offer to sell any considerable amount of my property for less than $1,000 a share. I am perfectly sure that I will be able to command that price as soon as some of my inventions are on the market." Telling Astor that he had contracts pending with the Creusot Works in France, the Helios Company in Germany, Ganz & Company in Austria, and other firms, Tesla requested an investment of $100,000. "If you do not take that much interest, you will put me at a great disadvantage. Should Astor come in, other Astor associates such as Mr. McKay and Darius Ogden Mills would do the same. If, Tesla wrote, "After 6 months you should have any reason to be dissatisfied, it will be my first duty to satisfy you." Astor stressed interest in seeing Tesla exploit his fluorescent lights, and the inventor agreed. On January 10, 1899, papers were signed whereby Astor gave Tesla $100,000 for 500 shares of the Tesla Electric Company. In return, Astor was elected director of the board. At the same time, Tesla moved into the Waldorf Astoria. Tesla also received $10,000 from the dry goods manufacturer Simpson and Crawford, and he may also have received funds from Mr. Mills or Mr. Mackay. The old Tesla company, with William Rankin and Edward D. Adams, was, for all intents and purposes, dissolved, along with his relationship with Alfred Brown and Charles Peck, although all of these individuals may have, in one way or another, been involved in the new enterprise. The first letter on Waldorf stationery written to the Johnsons is dated November 3, 1898. It is one of the rare letters in which Tesla refers to Mrs. Johnson as "my dear Kate." Tesla was about to hook a big fish, perhaps the wealthiest fish on the planet, and his sense of self-importance escalated accordingly. In haughty fanfare, the Serbian aristocrat separated his exalted ilk from other social tribolites, plebeians, drummers, grocerymen, and Jews. Anti-Semitic references are rare in the Tesla correspondence, but no doubt he was anti-Semitic, at least in the social sense, that is, as a common reflection of the times. Anti-Semitism against ethnic ghetto dwellers, such as those newly arrived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and New York's Lower East Side, was common among the upper classes, even though the Rothschilds, Auguste Belmont, Jacob Schiff, and Bernard Baruch were well respected and known to be Jewish. It is, however, clear evidence of one of Tesla's prejudices. The letter also refers to Tesla's wish to meet Lieutenant Hobson, whose Cuban exploits have been featured in the Century. "The interest in Hobson was at a fever heat at our offices," Johnson recalled, "and the estimates of the sale of his proposed book ran into the 100,000s. Unfortunately, shortly after his account appeared, a scandalous event occurred which was egged on by the sensational press, and the idea for the book fell flat. The incident had to do with Hobson's handsome appearance and the inability of women to refrain from kissing him when he came into their midst. "I would have cut off my right arm rather than to offend one of those ladies," Hobson declared, concluding, "The kissing episodes, what little there was to them, were entirely beyond my control, and my conscience is clear." The clashing lieutenant was well liked by Tesla and the Johnsons, and his entree into their circle added a wonderful spark to their lives. He would join a group that included at this time the Gilders, Miss Kushner, Miss Merrington, Mrs. Winslow, Mrs. Robinson, Mrs. Dodge, Rudyard Kipling, and John Muir. Playful jealousies became evident as Tesla and the Johnsons vied for the war hero's attention, Tesla daring even to tender to Hobson one lady with whom the inventor may have had intimate relations. "Remember, Luca," Tesla teased, "Hobson does not belong to the Johnsons exclusively. I shall avenge myself on Madame Philippoff by introducing him to Madame Kushner, and somebody will be forgotten." Tesla spent many delightful hours with Hobson, inviting him to the laboratory, to dinner, and out on the town. "He is a fine fellow," the inventor concluded. Their friendship would last. Hobson, 28, a Southerner, was a striking presence in his uniform, with deep-set, penetrating eyes, hair swept back, a firm, prominent chin, and a handlebar moustache. A graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy in 1889, he had spent 3 years in Paris, studying at a maritime college, and had worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence. Gifted with a keen mind, Hobson had worked for the Secretary of the Navy during the China-Japan War. His family, on both sides, included lawyers, judges, a governor, and a general. He was a ready-made hero, and he was a social catch of the first order.